Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Demystifying Money podcast. I'm your host, Misty Lynch, and today I'm joined by Regina McCann Hess. She is also a certified financial planner, a certified divorce analyst, and an author of Superwoman Wealth, How to Become Your Own Financial Hero. She's worked in the financial space for over 2 decades, and she's dedicated her career to helping empower professional women to take an active role in their finances. I am so excited to talk to her because this is something that I find really important. I love financial planning. I love helping people with their financial mindset and working with women because we do have some different situations, whether it comes from our upbringing or the way we've been conditioned to think and feel about money. So I'm excited to talk to her today about her experience, how she became, a certified financial planner, why she's focused in this space, and also some tips that she has for women that can help them do a better job with their finances and start feeling like the superwoman that they should. Thank you, Regina, so much for joining me today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you.
This episode of Demystifying Money with Misty Lynch is proudly sponsored by Soundview Financial Advisors. Visit www.soundviewfinancialadvisors.com to learn more.
So congratulations on your book. I think it is an experience writing a book, that's for sure. But tell me a little bit more about why you decided to write the book Superwoman Wealth, and have you always felt like a superwoman personally when it came to your money?
I will say no. I have to answer that question right away. It took a long time to feel like a superwoman about my money. And, it goes back to what I talk about, your money mindset and, how you grew up. And that drives a lot into the process. But, we grew up without any money. So we had to learn how to handle money because we didn't have any growing up. So it was an evolution. But I wrote the book because I ran into so many women just like me. We grew up, we were poor, we gradually earned money, and we were just determined to get out of that rut. But we also weren't educated about money when we were growing up, nor in high school or college. Nobody ever sat us down and said, hey, here's important things you need to know about money. And then a lot of times when we get married, we hand that off to our partner, because traditionally men are supposed to be better at handling money, or at least that's what our daddies taught us and, our brothers told us, but they didn't get that education either. So it's like the blind leading the blind sometimes, right? Yeah. Unless they had a finance degree.
Yeah, no. And I think that that's something that I've noticed with a lot of men and women that I work with, where sometimes I'll work with couples and they're both like, we don't know, and I think that is kind of the default is, well, I'll just hand the big money, long-term money investments over to him, where I don't know about your situation, but growing up, my mom was the one that did the day-to-day spending and saving and putting out fires. And like you, there was nothing left. There was just that. So it was very much short-term decision-making type of thing. Now, I think it's so important for women and men to understand like the importance of financial literacy and kind of filling in the gaps, understanding things that maybe scare you, and thinking that might be a reason to start to dig deeper and start to figure things out. So what are some of the things that you've found? You said you've talked to women that kind of grew up the same way. Is it usually fear that's the initial, or kind of avoidance? And how do you think people can start to gain confidence in this space?
Yes, you hit it on the nose. You really did. Obviously, you're in as far as I am. You're saying all the things that I would say. I love it. The confidence is something that will come as we get more education. So a lot of it starts with fear. It's the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of, I don't know that, so I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to look stupid. Sometimes when ladies go to speak to financial professionals, we don't know the jargon. Nobody knows the jargon. It's a secret language. But financial professionals, either mistakenly or on purpose, use financial jargon when they're speaking with individuals. and it's kind of off-putting. And then when you ask, you're afraid to ask the question, like, what does that mean? Because you don't want to sound stupid. So it comes from that fear aspect, but the education aspect, as you ask those questions, if you're paired up with the right person who answers those questions well for you, you can start that education process. And the other thing, and it's not like, oh, I'm educated in one day. It's a process just like anything else. But we've also seen studies that especially as women, the more educated we come upon the education of finance, the more confidence we build, and we actually do better at sticking to our financial plans than our male counterparts as a result of that confidence. And that's what we need. We need the confidence, but the stepping stones have to be there to get to the point where the confidence is.
How did you start? Did you begin your career in financial services, or did you come from another area? Because I feel like I worked in corporate and I learned about, putting money in my 401k, and employer stock really was what I kind of started doing, just because I was like, okay, I should. And now this wasn't, finally financial literacy kind of was something that you're right, it's a long process. It's not overnight, but sometimes some decisions early on can direct. So how did you start out, when you were, college? What was the path for you that kind of led you to where you are now?
Oh, I am smiling because it's a funny story. Okay, so I graduated with a bachelor's of science in nursing. So I graduated with a nursing degree and I went on to work in critical care nursing. So, the really, really sick people came to me in the ICUs and I focused on cardiac. So that's what I did. But when I graduated college, a real close family friend said to me, like, hey, I want to give you a gift for your college graduation, but I want to give you a stock. And I want you to do the research and tell me what I should buy, why I should buy it, and give me the reasons why you want to own something like that. And I was just like, what the heck? I don't want to do all that work. But he knew what he was doing. He was trying to teach me. He had tried to talk to me about the stock market before, but that was so foreign to me. I'm like, stock market, I could barely pay my bills, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So he and I had a couple conversations. Then I finally went back to him and I picked a stock in the healthcare arena so that was my comfort zone and I could at least understand a little bit better. And I went to him and I said, hey, I think this company would be a great holding and here's why. Well, it created a monster because he did buy that stock for me. And then after that, I was like, oh my God, this is really, really cool. I've never even known this existed. So I went back as I'm working full time now. I went back and took like some business classes and more focused on economics and the stock market and stuff like that. I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. So eventually, 5-7 years later, I decided to make the switch over and go do it full time. I know, right? It's crazy.
Yeah. No, but I think I love that you kind of did the research and picked something because it was an area you're familiar with. And I think that's one of the things that happens is we feel so overwhelmed, like, well, I don't understand the entire global economy. How could I possibly pick the right investment? And some people say, okay, then I will just pick the entire market and index. Either way, it's a decision. And
right.
You know what? Sometimes that it's just feeling paralyzed and not doing anything at all. That's usually the worst first move that people do. So that's so interesting. And so you also have focused, you have some expertise in the area of divorce. Is that something that you feel like you've seen people needs different financial help with when it comes to, women divorce? I know that divorcing later in life is starting to become a bigger financial hurdle for a lot of people. So tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in that space and some ideas for people who might be in that situation and really starting to, by default, have to handle their finances on their own.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And that's usually when they come to me, they've been married for, anywhere from 5 to 30 years and they haven't touched the finances in that length of time. So I re-educate them and it's like riding a bike. It just takes a little while. We re-educate them and they build that confidence just like we've been talking about. But, they need somebody to do that with them and do a little bit of hand holding. But with that designation, I work with, either one of the couples, like one of the partners or both of the couples, if I'm in neutral situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I basically help them, that whole time they've been accumulating this, big pile of money, right? Pile of money and assets. And now we have to separate it into two different buckets. So that's what I help them do. And I try to figure out like, okay, well, this is going to be better in your column versus his column. And, this is going to help you a little bit more long-term than him or her. And we just pretty much try to figure out what's going to work for them, not just today and tomorrow, but like 5, 20, 25 years down the road for retirement, because a lot of the problem is with women, if they've stepped out of the workforce, they don't have enough for retirement. So that's one area that I try to make sure we focus on, getting them enough of a piece of the retirement so that they are not going to be poor when they get to that stage. And, what started me down that path is, I had a couple clients get divorced, and I tried to use my financial planning background to help them. And it just apples and oranges. It did not work. So that's why I went back and got that designation. And it's a different type of planning. And I do love doing it. I mean, it's very emotional, so you got to protect yourself a little bit, but there's so many people who need help with this. And I love advocating so that I can make sure that the person I'm working with has a fair shot at being okay on the other side of divorce.
Yeah, no, I think it's so important. And I've seen it, we're getting towards the end of the school year. Sometimes that's when I start to hear more about people. And a lot of times it could be, the financial decisions can be made sometimes quickly because they want to get past this uncomfortable point in their lives, or there's children involved and they think, well, I need to keep the house, or I need to keep certain assets so that everything is as normal as possible. So I think it's helpful though to take a step back and look at the long-term financial decisions here about like who's getting the money, who's getting versus like having something like a home. Is that something that you've seen especially with the housing market right now, where people are like, where am I going to go? Or I can't sell the home right now. I can't refinance the mortgage. What are some things you're seeing in that space when it comes to divorce? And any tips for people that are really just feeling stuck or a little bit afraid about making the wrong choice?
Yeah, and actually the house, or housing, I should say, has been one of the biggest problems in divorce over the past 2 to 3 years because of the housing market. It's really, really hard to find a house. And even if you do, 10 of your best friends are putting their bids in on that house as well, right? So you're not getting that house. The other problem is that now we're in a higher interest rate environment. It's a lot more expensive. Although, if you look at it over time, it's actually an average interest rate environment, but it still hurts going from a 3% mortgage to a 7% mortgage. That hurts. Yeah. So years ago, the conversation would be, because when I'm advocating, I work with men and women, but mostly I work with women because they're the ones who need more help, because we're the ones who hand the finances off to our counterparts. And so a lot of the conversations I used to have was, could you afford to stay in the house? Because a lot of times it's an emotional decision for women. We want to be in that house where our babies were raised. We want to be in that house for our memories, things like that. So I would have to have conversations of, can you afford to be in the house? And then, sometimes I had to be the bad guy and be like, point out to them, like, this is going to sink your battleship, right? So that was then. This is now. Can you afford to move out of the house, right? Can you afford to get a house? Can you find a house? I mean, it's been really, really difficult, not just for the women, but for the men too. And so there's been some very creative solutions. Now they don't work long term. They might work a year or two, but we've been suggesting or working with people who are quote unquote nesting. So what they do is, if it's my week this week with the kids, I'm in the house. And my spouse is in an apartment. And then next week he comes to the house and I go to an apartment. And sometimes this apartment is shared just to keep the cost down. And other times it's not. But a lot of times we share the apartment because they're not going to be together. So they still have that, alone space. But it has helped buy time for people to figure it out. But it's not perfect. It's not a perfect solution.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. And I think you're right. There's so many emotional decisions that are being made. School districts, where do I, and that can put a
Mhm.
lot of pressure on. But sometimes you're right. It can be well, can you even afford to be here? And
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
that's
seriously.
going to be, if you are somebody who's financially stable and can afford, to do things, it'll be a different environment for the kids too than being in the house absolutely strapped for cash all the time. Like this, it's a difficult situation. So certainly helpful to have somebody like you around, to kind of navigate
Right.
through it. It is so tough, but definitely something we've been seeing. And you said, yeah, 30-year marriages, all sorts of situations, but it is important, I think, for women to start to understand the financial situation as early as possible in the relationship. I'm somebody who got married at 29, and my husband was in his 30s. So I've always had my own bank account, and I always kept it that way. And we have a shared
Good for
one.
you.
And he
Good for
has his
you.
own too. And I felt like I really didn't want somebody telling me like that's a bad thing to spend your money on or a good thing, when we had our independence for so long. Are you starting to see some changes as far as the way people actually, manage their money in a marriage? And I know there's really no right answer, but what are your personal thoughts on, how people should potentially approach money as a team?
Yeah, I think what you're doing is great. And I'm seeing a lot of the younger adults, I should
Mhm.
say. I call them kids, but they're not kids, younger adults. That's how they're starting out. I know I'm thinking of one in particular. She has her own bank account, he has his own bank account, and then they have a joint account
Yeah.
where they both, they know what the budget is and they know what they each have to put into that joint account
Mhm.
every, paycheck or whatever. And that way there's no question about the bills were paid and this is what we did. And then with their own money, with what they call their own
Mhm.
money, that's for extra savings, and that's
Mhm.
for spending on things that they want to spend on. Like, so if that's in my pocket and I want to go, I don't know, go get a manicure or whatever,
Mhm.
you can't question me because we've paid our bills and
Yeah.
this is my slush money, right? So, and I think that's great because it keeps everybody in the conversation about the finances. And, that's one of the things that I'm trying to bring back for the more mature people who've been married for a long time, who've had everything combined. I'm trying to bring kitchen table conversations,
Mhm.
which these younger adults are having because they have everything separated. But the older adults may not be because he or she has been handling the finances for so many years. The other one's like, I have no idea what's going on, right?
Mhm.
So bringing back the idea of kitchen table conversations. And the reason I do it that way is because money is a taboo topic and it
Yeah.
was never spoken about at the dinner table.
Mhm.
So if we make it okay to talk about it at the breakfast table or, or during that
Mhm.
meal, then eventually it gets to be a little bit more mainstream of a conversation. And then we teach our next generation that it is okay to talk about money and they
Mhm.
don't make the same mistakes that we did.
Right. Yeah, no, I've definitely, obviously with what I do, I talk about money all the time. So it's as normal to me as talking about like food or anything else that people would normally not feel weird talking about in front of other people. But I have started to, and my kids are about to go into middle school. They've had their own money, and I make like I took them to like a water park for my daughter's birthday, and she uses her own money in like arcade places, money she got for her birthday, so she could realize how fast it goes. And if something like
Great.
was not worth it or was worth it. And it's really funny how quickly you learn when you're spending your own money versus spending somebody else's money on like how you want to treat it. So I've been doing this for quite a while, and it's just very funny because her little girlfriends were like, what are you doing? She's just like, no, like I'm gonna put this back in my wallet now. But it's just funny to me to
Good.
think about keeping that information from them and then being
Right.
like, here you go, you're 17, 18 years old, make the biggest financial decision potentially of your life with college and have
True.
no clue how to think about money because it's never been yours. Um,
Right. Exactly.
what is some like and I'm seeing people treat college a little differently. There are a lot of people who are sending their kids to school now. The price tag, I'm in New England, is astronomical, and they're trying to get their kids to make good decisions, but the emotions are coming back in again. What was the weather like on that day you visited the campus? Was it beautiful? Have you loved this school forever? How do you talk to, when you're working with families and people who are emotionally attached to these decisions? How do you help them make better financial choices? And are you starting to see a shift in what people are just willing to do or just unable to finance these days?
Yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you, it really depends on their financial situation. So I know, I'll tell you a couple different stories to approach that. So my clients and friends, they have three kids. Two went to college. The one went to like a community college for the first 2 years. And they didn't have anything safe for college, right? And then, worker bees, mom,
Mhm.
dad, mom's a teacher, dad works at a car dealership. Great people. But they had other priorities. They have a child who needs extra care. So, the one daughter went to the community college for 2 years. Mind you, she was also bartending, at the restaurants and stuff like that. So she basically was working and putting herself through school. So she did that for 2 years. Then she transferred to Westchester University, which is, like a state school tuition, so not too expensive, but not cheap.
Yeah.
She graduated with a science degree in biochem, like a bachelor's in biochem. So good degree from Westchester. Doesn't mention anything about the fact that she went to community college for 2 years.
Yeah, no one cares.
She also still worked through while she was at Westchester, graduated with that degree, zero debt, because they say it can't be done anymore because that's how I did it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, well, apparently I can because she did it. And she's working at Merck making six figures. Like, so it can be done. You just have to be like, okay, well, I'm going to give up on not going to do the 4 year thing. I'm not going to join the fraternity. Da, 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 da. So if you're in that financial situation and the end goal is the most important thing for you, then you can have the conversation about going to the community college and doing it that way. However, the only thing there is you have to be a very motivated student. Oops, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be a very motivated student um, to do that process because I see a lot of people at community colleges just stopping at the 2 year and just saying, well, I did it and now I'm going to go get a job. And that's fine if that's right for them, right? So that's one story, and it worked out beautifully for her, and I'm so proud of her. Then I'll use my own story. I mean, like you, I grew up poor. I put myself through college. I worked part-time to full-time while I was in college. So college for my kids, not doing that is so important to me. So I did 529 plans.
Yeah.
And my 529 plans were like a mortgage payment every month, lots and lots of money. So I had enough money. So in the 529 plans, by the time my kids got to college age, we had a conversation. Here's how much is in your 529. You can go to Penn State and you can do all 4 years of Penn State and grad school.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. However, if you go to a private school, you have 4 years of college and that's all you have, and then it's on you.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's how I was able to do it. So I know, that's because I was so focused on it. So there's obviously a lot of people in between those two endpoints. Yeah. And that's where you have to have the combination of, student financial aid, loans, grants, applying for scholarships, things like that. And that's when you have to determine, is that piece of paper worth $250,000 a debt? Can I get that piece of paper with the same exact degree at a college that doesn't cost as much? And those are the conversations, like you said, those are the emotional conversations, hard to have. But then when you pull into, like, hey, are you going to be okay owing this kind of money? Because you're never going to be able to buy a house until that's paid off because you're just not going to be able to. So those are tough conversations, but I have them with people and it's not fun.
Yeah. And I think that there are some people who, like we worked through college, and then there's some that their parents did pay for it for them. And they think, I want to do the same thing for my child, not understanding completely how much harder it is today. And so when you said
Yeah.
that your 529 was like a mortgage payment, that's what it has to be. It is not, I put a little bit of money aside every month in the 529 since they were 8 weeks old, I think. I've never had the plan to pay for 100%. Like I've always kind of said I will have what's there, and then we had other financial goals. But if that is your main goal or one of your big financial goals, it is a lot of money that you have to start to put away. The earlier, the better. And so I think it's
Oh yeah.
important for people to really think about that and to understand that, like, it was beautiful that your parents could do that for you, but also like understanding that this is something that you're probably going to want to consider where they're going, what to do, and really have those conversations early about money, because other times I'll see them get to that point and think, where can I take it from? Because this is what's on my plate today. And usually the
Right,
biggest
right, right.
bucket of money is retirement or the home
Yeah.
equity.
And I'm sure you know this, but the biggest trend in college debt are parents in their 60s, 50s and 60s. Not the kids, the parents, because they take the parent plus loans, which not a fan of them,
No.
because they, lots of reasons, but that's where a lot of the student debt is really not
Mhm.
the kids, it's the parents, which is
Yeah.
really, really scary because they're approaching retirement.
Right, they're approaching retirement. And also those loans typically, if there is any forgiveness or, it's not going to be for them. It's not for the
Right.
parent loans. It's going to be,
No.
if the child goes into public service or something like that. So it is a really, really tricky time to, and it is a noble goal. But it is one of those
Hmm.
ones that I really think is worth talking about, working with people on, really starting to kind of, if you know yourself and you know you're going to start to do that, start saving now. If you know you're going
Yeah,
to pull it from somewhere else,
exactly.
let's start to figure it out. No, it's super important. What are some of the other areas in particular we've talked about? Oh, I have one because we both left pretty good jobs to start a business. So how is something like that when you look at, career changes? This is where a lot of people I talk to kind of feel like I want to do something different, but I'm so afraid of leaving my job, the benefits. What are some of those, how did you financially prepare to leave your firm, start a firm? And what are some of your thoughts when it comes to people who might be thinking that they want a big change, but the fear of the finances is
Yeah.
holding them back?
Oh, the fear is real. It is
True.
so scary, but it's also so liberating at the same
Yeah.
time because, yeah, I had planned to go independent for about a year and a half, because I was at a broker dealer before this with my clients and, captive.
Yep.
So it took me about a year and a half to plan to go independent. And then I build up a slush fund for a year and a half to 2 years of, extra cash flow in case it became a big dud or it took me longer to get up and running because at least for me I was bringing some clients over when I came from nursing. I We also said, well, if I don't do well here, I can always go back to nursing. And
Mm-hmm.
I also, I did do some like part-time per diem in the
Mm-hmm.
beginning until I was up and running. But it's never perfect, right? So you're always like, let's make sure that it's okay to fail because failure is you're going to learn something from it, but it's nobody wants to fail. Nobody wants to plan to fail either. So you have that cash cushion. You make sure that, you have enough to give you that runway to get up and running. And it's not for the faint of heart. I know about a week before I was leaving to go independent, um, I had a moment where I was just like, what the heck am I doing? This is crazy. I have a husband. I have 3 kids. I got to support. My mom lives with me. My brothers periodically come and
Mm-hmm.
go. I'm like, I could let down so many people if this doesn't work well. So scared.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, no, this is the path. I plan this, I plan this. And then, when I finally did it, it was like a 300-pound gorilla came off my shoulder. I was so happy and so glad that I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I could never go back now. But there's the planning in it and the saving and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. It may not go well, but you at least have a cushion to fall back on to get you back up and running.
Yeah, I think having that financial runway is important. And I've talked to people about building it up. You don't want it to be too long because then you might just feel like you're early retirement. And then like that could feel too comfortable, but it can't be so short
Yeah.
that you just immediately boomerang right back to the office. But it is something that I've noticed a lot more people thinking about. And I remember hearing some, like I was talking with someone and they'd heard like, people describing like the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario was going back to what they're doing every single day. And so if you're living like the worst case scenario every day of your life, a change
Yeah.
is probably necessary.
Absolutely.
Better
Yeah.
than
Like if you're
myself
dreading going to work
every
and you're dreading walking into that building, you need to make a change. And I was at that point.
yeah.
Even though I was at that point, it still took me a year and a half to plan it because I knew I had to do it right so I didn't land back in another spot like that.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
dread it. I dreaded going into that building every day.
I think there's a lot of people that feel that way, but I do think it's interesting to see the movement into, self-employment. I think there's a lot of women that are creating businesses or starting businesses, at least in this, in New England. I've seen it a lot in the Boston area. There's a huge entrepreneurial spirit, or people who've just been let down from corporate or have lost jobs or have had to figure it out some way. So I think that that's
Right.
another area where the financial planning is so important because you really can, it might just seem impossible
Mm-hmm.
until you actually
Absolutely.
start to look at what would it cost? How much does it cost to be me in a month? And a lot of people just really don't know. They've just been going every day and doing what they've always done. So that's another area that I think can be so interesting.
Yeah.
So
And
I'd
some
love
of
to
us don't want to know how much it costs to be
know,
us.
but it's interesting once you do because I feel like there's again there's so much shame and
Yeah.
guilt when it comes to money. And immediately when people work with me, they're like, you're going to see that I spent this much here. You're going to judge me for going to Wines and More. You're going to judge me for my coffee. And it's, what's your take on that? Because I don't really care how people spend their money, but I do care how they feel about it. And if that's the first thing they're telling me is like, I don't like, I spend too much here, or I go out way too much, or I know that what I'm doing wrong. What are some of the things that you help people at least kind of get past the shame, but also take a look at the spending in?
Right. Right. I agree with them. I said, yeah, I'm embarrassed too. Like if you saw, what my family spends, I use my family as an example all the time. I'm like, if you saw what my family spends on going out, you would be astounded and you'd be like, ah, she's horrible. Right.
Mhm.
But that's where whenever I need, and I use it as an example again, I'm like, whenever I need to pinch in the budget, that's the first place I go. I know where we spend
Mhm.
too much money. And then I pull it back and I say to the family, like, hey, we are spending way too much money here. We need to pull it back, and this is where we're going to take it from. And
Mhm.
then for other people, like when they really are struggling and they're trying to figure it out, I always say, okay, let's get 6 months worth of credit card statements, 6 months worth of your bank account statements, and let's see where that money goes. Because of the credit cards, you don't really see where that money's going because it's just like, oh yeah, here you go, here you go, here you go. And one of the biggest places I find is Amazon. Because you don't really feel like you're spending money because you just hit a button on your computer and like, oh, and it shows up at my door tomorrow. This is great.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes just showing them where the money is and saying, going and saying, hey, look, my family has the same issue. My daughter, God, that girl needs to stop spending on Amazon. But if you're concerned about your spending, here are some of the same places that you can look to spend. So you kind of like make them part of your group and because you're having the same issues, so it's nobody's perfect. We're all struggling with like, hey, we need to spend less money and save more, but we're also living, we're also out there living every day, so it's a constant battle. Like every time I think I have it under control, a couple months later I'm like, oh, there goes that Amazon budget again. Where's my daughter?
Yes. Right. And I think that it's never been easier to part with your money, like you've said. I mean, when we were growing up, if we wanted something, we had to go to a store, find it. We couldn't just think about it or talk about it, and then magically an ad appears in our phone, on our feed with the exact thing that we were thinking about. It is it is not a personal failure, I think, for people. to be, spending, but also it is one of those things, like you said, we look at the credit card statements, we look at the actual spending to see like, what is it? Is it a need or a want? And I do think there is a big difference.
Yeah.
Like you said, there are certain things that I'd say, yep, I like this. This is what I would cut if I had to,
Yeah.
and knowing like
Yeah.
what's going first, how much could we free up? It doesn't mean you have to, but it is kind of, I
Right.
find it comforting. And this could be because of the financial life we had growing up, where it just went like we had a lot of stuff and then we had nothing, to be like, okay, this is where I would go first. And then
Right.
how much does it cost, like bare minimum, to get by,
Right.
pay the bills, live in the house, and it's good to know the difference.
Right. And if people feel like you're struggling with some of the same things, they're not as embarrassed. They're like, oh, thank God I'm not alone.
No.
And then they feel a little bit better and are a little bit more willing to work on things.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's something that has been a shift in finance, because it used to be, the guy in the suit with the cufflinks with the perfect giant desk, and they were sitting away from you and they were like, well, look at this, what are you doing? And you're just like, I mean, I wouldn't want to go to that meeting either. I wouldn't want to have that kind of conversation myself. So I could see why some people initially are like, you're just going to tell me what I'm doing wrong, you're not going to understand. Where I think that's what's important about writing the book. Like, you have a podcast as well, where you kind of let people hear you and learn about you and understand kind of your approach to finances, because it's definitely something a lot of us could use more support, more guidance in, more education, more awareness on. So I would love for you to share how people can find your book, find your podcast, and learn more about you if they're thinking that they do need this kind of help and they want to work with somebody who is willing to kind of sit on the same side of the table with them.
Oh, great. And of course, it's on Amazon, where we all shop.
If you're putting something in your Amazon cart, let it be a personal finance book.
Let it be my book, right?
Agreed.
So it is on Amazon. Superwoman Wealth, How to Be Your Own Financial Hero. And then my website is forgewealth.com. And, we're going to follow each other on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Forge Wealth, and YouTube. And LinkedIn is Regina McCann Hess.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me today. It was such a pleasure to speak with you, to talk to another like-minded person in this industry. I know how it can be, and it's interesting to see, what you're doing, what your thoughts are, and how you're helping people. If you're out there listening and you'd like to, read more financial literacy books or the podcast, please head over to mistylynch.com. I would love to meet with you or have you catch up on other episodes of the podcast. And thank you so much for joining me today, Regina, and thank you all for listening. I think it is so important for women and men to both focus on having a healthy relationship with their finances. And I think it can be a really great place to start if you start working on your own feelings and your own thoughts. So thank you so much, Regina, and we'll talk again next week. Don't forget to share with friends and family, and together let's demystify the world of money. Knowledge is the key to financial empowerment.